Hello everyone, I'm William Barnes-Graham, the Executive Editor at the Chartered Institute of Export and International Trade, and today we're talking data and trade digitalisation. And I'm delighted to be joined here by our UK Public Affairs Lead, Grace Thompson, and the Imports Advisory Practice Lead, Ilona Kawka, to talk about this really important topic. And why is it important? Well, the House of Lords Select Committee for International Agreements has recently launched an inquiry about this topic, and we have ourselves given a response to it. So I'm delighted to be talking to you both about that response. Grace, if I can begin with yourself, could you explain what the inquiry is and why the House of Lords is looking into this area?
By all means, yes. Thank you, Will. So the International Agreements Committee is a committee that sits in the House of Lords, and it scrutinises agreements that come before Parliament, and it also looks at how government negotiates in terms of its conduct with trade agreements with other countries. And the inquiry that's just taken place on data and digital trade kind of falls in that second bucket, looking at how digital trade and data agreements can be made smooth and interoperable with other countries. It's been a relatively short inquiry, so they've only had 2 evidence sessions in Parliament, and they've taken a kind of informal call for evidence. But it's been really impactful so far, and I'm sure we're going to talk more about it in a minute.
Just to take a step back, what are we talking about when we say trade digitalisation? Ilona, if I can bring you in on that question. So what are we talking about, and why does trade digitalisation matter?
So it's a really interesting topic because just until recently, digital trade did not have a clear explanation of what it exactly is. And now we are kind of happy to just define it as commerce that happens digitally, and the goods are either delivered digitally or physically. So that applies to both services and goods, physical goods. And it is important because it helps us to actually expand trade and expand the reach of the transactions that we can do. And it also reduces a lot of, eliminates a lot of problems, such as a huge amount of paperwork that we have to provide for trade. So basically 2 things: simple trade, facilitated trade. Digital trade is a synonym to that, but we can just bring savings and expand the trade through that.
It sounds a really interesting area, and I'm thinking as well because you're talking about streamlining trade to some extent, and trade is obviously something which has its own emissions and so on. So is there a sustainability angle to this as well?
A big one for digital trade is coming paperless. So the government is doing a lot of efforts towards enabling the digital trade and enabling the paperless transactions with digitalization of trade. So when we remove the paper from equation, we bring a lot of savings because we reduce the need of printing the documents, and the amount of documents that are being printed is enormous still globally, despite the broad expansion of digitalization. But it will help us to bring those sustainable trade and bring us closer to the net zero.
And presumably as well, digital trade requires a lot of information to be inputted, and that's presumably where the data aspect of the inquiry comes in as well. So could you say a little bit more about data and data standards in trade?
So data standards is something that we have to look at, and we have to consider as businesses, as trade specialists, and government as well, because data standards create this possibility of digitalization and enable interoperability. And it's another keyword that's really important nowadays, aside from digital trade as it is. Digital standards bring the format of the data, so we are actually able to create a connection between systems and that the data is transferred in the same form. So we are looking at, and we really promote the global standards for data, so that the data is transferred in this and overwritten in the same form. It's really important that the UK as a country consults and talks to other countries, and that we agree that we are using the same data standards and create this communication between not just governmental systems, but also between businesses.
And the Chartered Institute has responded to a particular question in this inquiry, which is around government support So I'm wondering, Grace, to begin with yourself, could you say just a little bit about what the government is already doing to support digital trade?
Yeah, so obviously we have a new government. I say new, that they've been in a few months now, but still relatively new in the grand scheme of things. And they, I think, really recognise the benefits that can be accrued through digital trade progress. I think we just have to take a step back first and look at what the previous administration did, because they ran something called the Ecosystem of Trust pilots. And these were essentially digital trade corridor pilots, which trialled like a theoretical frictionless border. And the Chartered Institute, we actually supported on a couple of those pilots from the EU to Immingham and from Africa to Immingham as well, to trial how we can implement digital trade corridors. So obviously the previous administration was looking at that, and the Cabinet Office published a report which showed that the automation of customs declarations, if it could be scaled up appropriately, could save businesses up to 40% in terms of customs data collection costs. So the previous administration, demonstrated through those trials that there was a lot to be gained. Fast forwarding to the current administration, we're now on phase 2 of those pilots, and the name's transformed a little bit. I think they're now called border trade demonstrators. So the Chartered Institute, again, is working with the government on those pilots to see if we can kind of upscale the work of the original pilots. And more broadly as well on digital trade, Minister Douglas Alexander, who's the Minister for Trade Policy and Economic Security, he spoke in the second evidence session of this inquiry. And he said that digital trade was actually going to form the core of the trade strategy, which is being published by the government in the spring. So I think there's a lot of good intention and a lot of goodwill, both from industry and government, on making sure that digital trade is a success.
Just to take a step back again, so we talked about the ecosystem of trust, the border trade demonstrator. Another phrase I've heard is digital trade corridor as well. Ilona, if I can bring you in, because I know you've been involved in these projects a bit as well. Could you just say a little bit about what we mean by all of these kind of different phases? What are we talking about here?
So digital trade corridors can be defined as a system that uses disruptive technologies to facilitate trade, but also to bring the visibility and transparency to supply chain. So we can see there different actors. We can see the traders that exchange the goods. We can see freight forwarders that transport the goods, but also the government agencies that are involved in the digital trade corridors. And that allows to build trust between all those parties. Hence, when we're using those disruptive technologies, we are able to bring a reduction in data input, so the duplication of data. We are uploading the documents in a digital form, so like we mentioned, the data standards and digital documents, and they are transferred without delays. The government has a visibility in advance on the goods that are coming, so they're able to move away the control of the goods from the border and make decisions based on the data, whether they would like to check those goods or just let them go freely. So just technology that brings this trust that's really important in any transaction and any movement of the goods.
Trust seems so important in trade these days, doesn't it? And it sounds like some really smart innovations there as well, so really great to hear about that. Just in terms of back to the inquiries, what has the Chartered Institute said in terms of what the government should be doing now to better support businesses adopt these sort of solutions?
I believe that our role and the government's role is to create opportunities for people to actually utilize what already has been done. So bringing the example of digital electronic trade documents bill that was implemented a while ago. And people are still not very much aware of the possibilities that it brings. And they're still a little bit scared and they don't really know where to start. So we recommend to start looking at that and promoting the opportunities better, and also maybe bringing some experts to talk to people so that they can see and explore the opportunities for them when it comes to digitalization. And of course, we are there to come and forward and support anybody who needs help on explaining those little nitty-gritty details on how to implement those.
Of course. And I know that you lead our new imports advisory practice, which gives advice on these on these issues. So it's a really important thing to mention. Finally, Grace, I mean, we respond to several inquiries all the time at the Institute. Could you just say a little bit more about this line of work? Because I know you're involved in it very strongly. So could you say a bit more about it, and also how our members, but also the wider trader community, can have their voices heard in our responses?
Yeah, this is such an important point. So thanks for raising it, Will. We are a trade association with members, and one of our most vital functions actually is representing those members' voices to government, because if we can properly advocate for the issues that members are facing on the ground, or for example, the opportunities that they're seeing on the ground, then government can better target their help and advice and their policies going forward. So we see this interlocutor function that we have between the business community and government as being entirely vital to what we do. So we do respond to a lot of consultations and inquiries, and we try to gain member data for that. So for example, with the industrial strategy coming up, the government's consulting on that at the moment, and we put a survey out to members to ask them their opinions on the government's new industrial strategy green paper. So members can input via surveys such as that, but also members and the wider business community are welcome to email us directly to raise different policy challenges or opportunities that they may have. And they can do that by contacting my team at publicaffairs@export.org.uk. I think another thing to say is that we really appreciate that businesses, particularly small businesses, entrepreneurs, they just don't have time to keep up with all the government consultations and call for evidences that are flying around. I mean, that's for us geeks to do, really. So we, work out which ones are most relevant for the members in our community, and then can tailor the responses appropriately, gather the data that we need, and help businesses with that time challenge to still have their voices heard.
Terrific. Well, let's call you guys interlocutors rather than geeks. I think that's a nicer word. But thank you both for talking to me and to our viewers today about digital trade and data. It's a really complex area, so do check out the website for more information about what it is, and kind of some explanations as well about things like the Electronic Trade Documents Act. We did a webinar on that last year. Lots of good information on our website and on our social media and YouTube channels as well. But I think that's it for today. Thanks, guys, and I hope that's been useful.